Hi, this is Andrew Sears again, and in this part, I'm going to walk you through some of the key concepts to understand going through phase one of the course design process that we have at City Vision University. And there, we're going to go through course needs, research, and planning. So the most common instructional design model is called ADDIE, and that stands for Analysis, Design, Develop, Implement, and Evaluate. So there's kind of two ways of thinking about that. One is the way it was traditionally presented, where it is you do these over a very long period, and it follows something called waterfall design. But then there's the more recently, just people are using this no matter what sort of time frame you use. You might just use these to list the steps, and that's kind of how City Vision does it. So one thing to realize with City Vision, we spend a lot more time on analysis than most schools because our courses are less standardized and more contextualized. What the traditional ADDIE or what's called Waterfall in project management follows backward program design. Part of the reason why that can work is because you have an audience that is known, and that's traditional students. So, and then you have outcomes for well-defined fields. Say you're going to be designing, you have 18 to 24 year old middle class white students, and then you're going to be designing outcomes for accounting, and then you have assessments based on known accounting, and accounting has very well defined standards in the field. You have assessments based on known outcomes, and instruction with known content. So there's tons of accounting textbooks, and then you can have evaluation feedback, and you have an iteration process in years that often will be 5 years. So at City Vision, we follow a little bit different process. So part of what is worth describing is many of you may have heard of the project management iron triangle, and the idea behind this is that you can pick time, cost, or scope, or sometimes people call that quality. I think scope's probably a better thing. But if you want something done quickly, then often that's going to cost you more, or you're going to have to take down the scope of what it is that you're planning on doing. So this is important in terms of design, because the priorities of your organization and your culture and your price points really going to affect, where you go on this triangle. So for City Vision, one of the things you have to understand is that you can either start with a fixed cost design, and that's what City Vision is doing, is we say we're going to be radically affordable. Our cost is going to be 1/3 to 1/4 of traditional schools, versus fixed scope or fixed quality design. So traditional campus, you have to do all the bells and whistles. And you're going to say, well, if that after it's all done, it costs $50,000 a year, then that's how it's going to work. So that's something that's different about how City Vision approaches is we're looking at fixed cost design. Another thing that's different about City Vision is we are much more adaptive and practical in our application. So we're going to do the revision frequency, so that the time is important on how we do things. So some of that has to do with the fact that our students are working in nonprofit fields. So the practical is super important. The other is those who are cultural minorities or those with limited resources, which is pretty much everyone in the nonprofit field, often face environments with a lot more unknowns than people in, say, big business, where it's majority culture students and it's more homogeneous culture. So you need to have adaptive design more. And then the third is just, what is the definition of quality? So the foundation of most materials or books is for majority culture students, or, in many cases it's business context. So we have to translate that into a nonprofit context. Sometimes we can find textbooks, sometimes we can't. The cultural contextualization is a lot more important part of the definition of quality for those in the nonprofit field and for non-majority culture students. So those are all things that make our approach to design different. Now, another thing that makes our approach to design different, I explained that ADDIE traditionally follows something called Waterfall. And Waterfall is good, where you have a known problem. We know what customers want, and the field doesn't change much. So I described, say, accounting does change, but it's not, 3/4 of the entire accounting field changing all at once, right? And then the solution, we know how to deliver it. The technology and resources don't change much. So Waterfall was used to put a man on the moon. It's used for, the Manhattan Project. It's used for giant projects that take, 5 years, 10 years. Building a building is typically done using Waterfall. Whereas pretty much all software projects these days follow something called Agile. So there you're starting with, we know what customers want, but often whenever you're coding, you don't know the best solution and you don't know the best resources to use towards that. So with Agile, some City Vision courses are in that domain, but most City Vision courses follow what's called Lean Startup as a methodology. And, we have our 3 values: Jesus, justice, technology. By far the primary way that the technology value comes forward with City Vision is that most of our processes are designed more around this lean startup philosophy. So we don't know what our customers want, and we don't know the best solution. So I'll just use an example. We launched our MBA program, and we thought that we would just do a generic MBA. Our students did not want that, and we had to do a major revision for that. So we should have done more of a lean startup project. So then we revised the MBA program, and we realized that our students wanted really an MBA with just a concentration in nonprofit management. So that's what we did. So what is the lean startup process? So the lean startup process is basically a bunch of tools that was developed out of Silicon Valley, and the whole point is to maximize innovation, and you do that by maximizing this loop iteration speed. So they came up with the term MVP, minimum viable product. So you build your course, and your version 1, using software language, you're going to assume that your version 1 is only going to be 60 to 80% on target. I've designed probably 20 courses for City Vision. Sometimes I've got 60% on target. Probably the best I've done is maybe 90% on target. And City Vision is really big on looking at data. We have staff meetings where we scour all the student feedback, all the faculty feedback. And then we, most universities do minor revisions, every few years. We do a minor revision every year. And a lot of times, it can be, 10 to 20% of the course being updated with major revisions every 5 years. So that's part of what makes this different. So, so how this works is we have City Vision's 5-phase course design project. So you're going to start with a blank design template with a course title, and then you're going to go through analysis. The first part of the analysis, steps 1 through 4. So that's some data that you're collecting, and then out of that data, one of the key things that you're going to do is you're going to identify the book and key content. So part of the reason why I'm going to interact with you a lot, or whoever's supervising you in this process is going to interact with you, is we want to go through this lean startup process as you're designing the course. So why are we doing it so iterative? It's because of this. We follow a lean startup or agile. So we start with an agile process for initial design. Now, part of the difference, just to explain here, the difference between Agile and Lean Startup is Agile might have iterations every 2 weeks, but you're not getting feedback from customers. Whereas Lean Startup, you're actually getting feedback, from customers, or in this case, students. So that's why I say we start with an Agile process for the initial design, and then Lean Startup. So you go through, you get the book and key content that selected, and then we have you do the first. We have you do phase 2, which is the first draft course outcomes and outlines. Plus, usually we'll have you do week 1, and then I'm going to give you feedback on that, so that you can, finalize the outline, and if there is some sort of final project, you can also finalize, what is the basic scope of the final project. And then you're going to go through phase 3, where you're going to go and design weeks 1 through 8 and your final project template. I'll give you feedback on that, and then you'll revise those. You'll identify where you need lectures. Often I use lectures. The way I describe it is that's the glue that's going to hold everything together. And there's pieces that often, it's hard to explain how the pieces come, fit together of what you're presenting to the students. So often, what a course looks like to students is 8 random ideas that aren't connected. So a lot of times I'll do lectures to explain the connections, in the course. So in phase 4, you're going to go through a draft presentation for your lectures. You're going to finalize your outcomes. So we have you do first draft outcomes, but then again, we're following lean startup. So at the end, you have a better understanding of the outcomes. I'm going to give you feedback on that. You're going to revise your presentation. Then you're going to record your lectures, finalize your course description. Just like if you're writing a major paper, often they say, you write your summary or your abstract at the very end, because then you're going to have a more thorough understanding and be able to summarize it better. And then the way it's going to work is our staff is going to copy what you put into this Google Doc, this template. They're going to copy that directly into Canvas. So you got to understand, whenever we say a blueprint, it's going to be cut and paste directly into Canvas. So you have to understand that that's how it works. So, again, the differences between Waterfall, Agile, or sometimes in software it's called Scrum and Lean, as I explained. So Waterfall is 3 to 5 years. Agile, you get feedback, and that's what we're doing in this process. But with Lean, you're getting feedback from the students. So, for us, as you're going through the 5 phases, I'm giving you feedback. But then as each year or each time we offer the course, we're collecting a faculty feedback on the course. Often will be a detailed feedback form and student feedback. So let's get into the basic framework for phase 1 of the course design. So that's what we call the course needs and capabilities analysis. So basically what you're trying to do is figure out, what do you put it in terms of the course outcomes, the assessments, and the content in the course, right? So, and there's 4 components of that. So the internal stakeholder needs and priorities, what's the organizational mission, the objectives, faculty input, program learning outcomes, all the things that I talked about in the last presentation before this was the big picture for this. But you're going to need to study some of these things, particularly for your program. And I'll talk a little bit more about how some of these things tie in with the program. And then external stakeholder needs. So you're going to fill out part of the form where you're going to do your best to assess the needs of students and employers. Sometimes that's the advisory board or standards. Addiction counseling already has defined standards. And then over here on 3, you're going to be looking at comparable course syllabi, outcomes, textbooks, and topics, learning from the field. So one of our principles is, if you don't have to reinvent it, don't reinvent it. A lot of things we do have to reinvent, but often the way we reinvent is we find 3 different, syllabi that, here's a Christian syllabi, here's a secular syllabi. We'll learn from each of those. And then the last part I call external capabilities. Now, whenever you're developing software, often how you develop it is going to depend on the libraries that are available and, all the resources that are available. And whenever people design courses, often they don't really have that mindset. They just think, well, I have a textbook and I'm going to design based on the textbook. But often whenever I design, I find, sometimes, having a great textbook will make a huge difference in how I do the design. So that is a really significant part. But there's been other times whenever there's a free course that's available that I can assign like a book. Whenever I did the social entrepreneurship course, I did that, and that made a big difference in how I designed the course. So, knowing what's out there can make a big difference in how you design. So one of the things I talked about was, the program learning outcomes, and part of this gets into what you're really asking about is, how does this fit into the program? Now, I'm going to talk about the big picture program framework that we have for management and ministry. There's often more specific program learning outcomes. Each course ties to a program outcome, but in management and ministry, we have 4 main competencies across all of our degree programs. So that's our ministry degree program, our nonprofit degree program, and our business degree programs. And across all those programs, and we might have different emphases depending on those different degrees, but we'll have ministry competencies, business competencies. So in the business and funding competencies, we're talking about grant writing, fundraising. So if you're developing a course here, you need to keep in mind that a lot of what you're trying to do, falls within the principles of this quadrant. The ministry competencies, just understanding how you fit into, we have a whole sequence of 4 courses that cover cross-cultural competencies. If you're designing a cross-cultural course, how does that, fit into that? How does your course fit into spiritual formation in terms of the organization? And then operational competencies, you can see the list of courses here. These are all kind of the detail-oriented, and then the innovation competency. So this framework is called Competing Values Framework, or sometimes it's called the OCAI. We use this throughout our courses. We probably use it 5 different times in the management and ministry department, and we have students take assessments of their organizations and individually. And part of what we do in the management and ministry is we try to get them to synthesize. So, if you're teaching a course on human resources, they're going to have a strategic management course where they're going to have to trade off, okay, here's some human resource priorities, here's some social entrepreneurship priorities. If we launch this new initiative, it might stretch our staff. If we don't launch the new initiative, we might be able to, give staff raises right now, but then that may not help in the long run, right? So you have to have these things trade off. Now, another framework is our ministry education strategy, just understanding, where does your course fit? Are you kind of doing the foundational Bible, core theology, applied theology, or some of these higher level tools? And another framework that we use that I referenced in the previous one is, are you trying to teach what to believe, the doctrinal foundation, how to see the theological vision, or what to do in your courses? So if you're doing Bible and theology, this is more of a ministry framing, right? Or this is for our master's in Christian ministry. You have program outcomes here, and then you have organizational skills. So just understanding where you fit in terms of this framework. Often, we're so focused on, how to do things, fundraising, grant writing, all these different things, but we forget why. We forget some of the foundation. So recognizing and trying to tie that back in can be important. Now, with addiction counseling, people in the addiction counseling understand the competencies that are in addiction counseling from TAP 21, but also, thinking about what are the key tensions that need to be addressed in terms of Christian integration for this particular course, and are we addressing those well? So those are all key factors. So this ties, all of this stuff here ties back into this first item here, the organizational mission, faculty input, program learning outcomes. So with that, the next part, you're going into looking at content and your capabilities, right? So how unique is the content to the organization, and what resources do we have in-house? These are 2 key questions that we have to design. So let me use an example where I decided to buy. So accounting changes a lot in terms of the details. I would say it's 5% of accounting will change, but that 5% is really important, right? So whenever I say a lot, the whole field isn't changing. Like sometimes in computer science, the entire field will change over a 5-year period. But so it's hard to keep up to date on that, and we don't have a ton of faculty that are good with this. So a lot of what we've been doing recently is we've been outsourcing kind of to the textbook, using courseware, because that content isn't that unique to City Vision. So our Accounting 101, we essentially decided to do outsource. Whereas the more unique something is, we develop in-house. There's a lot of courses that we do most of the development in-house. And there's a lot of things that, this is called build versus buy. It's also build versus get for free on the internet. Thinking about, where do we use that? So some of the things to think about also for book selection is, you have to ask the questions about the course that you're doing. So in the design, one of the things that we have you do is, identify what is the level of Christian integration. So if it's, medium or deep, often we're going to combine a secular textbook with a Christian book. And often the secular textbooks needed, like for addiction counseling, we have to do that to meet the standards, really, because there just aren't Christian books covering all these topics. And then cross-cultural courses often will have a baseline book that kind of fits in the middle of cultural groups. And then we let students choose a book to fit their culture, is a fairly common way we'll do it. So they'll have two books. There's a question of, is this a standardized course versus a customized course? So standardized courses, we're going to look for textbooks that will minimize the work of course design. And often this correlates to, is this a theoretical or foundational course? So for instance, Accounting 101 is, pretty basic. It's foundational. Versus, as we get into nonprofit accounting later, it's harder to find the textbook that actually fits what we're looking for there. And then another question is, what level of a course? Is this a 100 level, which is for freshmen, or 600 level, which is for graduate school? So often for lower level courses, we're looking for books that are easier to read. It's like reading Peter Drucker for a business book versus a textbook, or a popular Christian counseling book versus a textbook. That's something to think about. So whenever I'm searching for books, I'll compile one list of books by looking at sample syllabi. And usually I'll try to find Christian syllabi and non-Christian syllabi, and then get a list of books from that. I'll search on Amazon and other online sources. Often the video search and book search might inform each other. So one of the most common things I'll do is, in almost any faculty, you look and you want to include like 8 books in your course because they're all so good. Well, we're not going to do that because that's not fair to the students, right? That's too much work. But what I will often do is I'll get the top 2 that I want, but then there's often a video presentation by that author that's summarizing their book. And then I'll include that, somewhere else in the course if that's applicable. So let me just use some examples where content research drove design. So a big part of what we have you do in the design process is the content research. A course that we're designing right now, one of our board members, he helped write a book called Emotional Intelligence in Christ. And after he explained to me that he had the book and the course, an online course, but he was giving it to us for free. It included personality type quizzes. I realized we could turn that whole thing into a course, very little work without hardly any change. So we designed based on that. And it was a quick design. Then with personal finance, we did a bunch of research. Shauna did an amazing job at doing all the research. And over time, we identified, we already knew Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace program. But we found that Randy Alcorn, he had an amazing book that did the Christian integration for this. But what was even better is he had a whole workbook that students could use that he gave away for free, which was just made it really easy to do the design. So we would have designed differently were it not for Randy Alcorn's, the capabilities that were there. And even now, Covenant College has a new initiative out of their center that is focusing on financial training that we may adopt there for the next major revision. So social entrepreneurship, there is a free world-class course in Udacity called How to Build a Startup, essentially by the guy who is the godfather. He's considered the godfather of Silicon Valley training. And there's a lot of other courses. Strategic management, I found an extremely practical project-based book, focus on nonprofits. For family issues and recovery, I found the book Changes That Heal that I've seen I've seen and known hundreds of people who their lives have been changed by that. So we wanted to have that in the course to have, transformational impact. So anytime there's a standardized course, typically they're going to design around, instructor resources provided by the textbook provider. And some of the other things we're looking at is for future graduate Bible and theology courses, we're likely to use Right Now Media when possible. So the last thing I want to talk about is just kind of the big picture of what we're trying to train you in as a course designer. So whenever you went through City Vision's faculty training program course to become adjunct faculty with City Vision, we had you fill out the team profile. And a lot of the work that you do as adjunct faculty, it's in what's called the stable phase. Sometimes you're doing develop stable phase, but whenever you're designing a course, most of that is in the develop stage. So it's in the develop state or phase if you're doing new course design in standardized subjects. So what are the competencies that you need for that? So you need expertise in online course design, faith integration in online course design, a good understanding of City Vision's values, processes, tech, and content, practical cultural competency needed for course design, and subject matter expertise for courses or department. Now, if you're doing a new course design for highly customized or interdisciplinary subjects, then you need extraordinary expertise in online program and course design. You need expertise in faith integration. You need very deep understanding of City Vision's values, processes, tech, and content, extraordinary expertise in faith integration and practical cultural competency, expertise in accreditation requirements and related education theory, and then understanding departmental subject matter expertise. So depending on the type of course you're doing, and there's a lot of courses that are kind of in between these two, right? But the point is that the level of expertise gets higher the more customized a course is, or the more interdisciplinary course it is. So in the next part, I'm going to go through a walkthrough of our analysis template. So hopefully you find this helpful. So thanks a lot.